to the workshop. In today's video, I'm going to be making a coffee table. Now, this isn't any ordinary coffee table. It's got a hand-carved textured base and a magnificent Burr oak top with ebony banding. It was such an enjoyable project, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you the full build process, walking through every step in the build. So I first started off making the tabletop. I want this top to be quite chunky, so I'm using 1-inch thick birch plywood, and I'm going to be veneering either side with 1.5mm constructional veneer. Now, this veneer is the nicest veneer I've ever used. It is 450-year-old Burr oak from Sutherland in Scotland. These veneers were custom cut especially for this project, and it was so worth it. The grain is absolutely stunning, and I even have some left over for future projects. So I veneered the top with the oak and the underside of the table with stained black poplar. I did this to match the ash base that I will be ebonizing. Normally when I joint veneers together, I run them over the planer. This gives me a perfectly straight edge to tape the veneers together without a gap. You can only really do this with constructional veneers. If you're using standard veneers that are 0.6mm thick, they're a bit too thin to run over the planer. However, a viewer in a previous video mentioned that they jointed constructional veneers with a track saw. I hadn't tried this method before, but I gave it a go with this project and it worked really well. I can stack up the veneers together and joint all the edges in one go. To glue on the veneer to the substrate, I use Type 1 cold press glue. That is my favourite veneer glue. It sets very quickly and it allows you to spread a really thin layer. You may notice I wrap the board in cling film. I do this because if there was any glue squeeze out, it's not going to stick to the bag. When you're vacuum pressing, you need to add a flat board on the top and bottom of the tabletop. If it was just the bag itself, pressing the veneer on, you're not going to get as much pressure because there'll be wrinkles in the bag. Putting a flat board on the top and bottom will really help squash the veneer down flat. This Burr oak, because it was so figured and had lots of bubbly areas, there were actually quite a few voids to fill. This was a really fun job with the wood repair kit. It was really satisfying squeezing the fillet into the voids, pressing it down with a cold plate and trimming it off with the blade. I chose black because it's a really deep colour. It will accentuate the voids and it won't take away from the grain. If you're interested in purchasing or finding out more about the wood repair kit, there'll be a link in the description down below. I also use the O3A black super glue to fill in the smaller cracks. So after veneering the top and bottom of the substrate, the edges were still exposed. So I flushed the overhanging veneer off with a flush trim router bit. I cut a thin strip of the oak burl veneer to line the edges. I glued that on and clamped it in place with masking tape. Adding the veneer around the edges just made this top look like a solid slab of oak, but I wanted to take it to the next level, and I thought adding a very thin string inlay of ebony around all the edges is really going to make this top pop and sort of frame the oak really nicely. So I cut a rebate on all the edges with a bearing guided rebate bit. This cut was only 3mm deep. Then I got some ebony and cut some banding on the bandsaw. I went slightly over 3.5mm so then I can plane it back flush with the tabletop. Initially, I had told my client that this inlay would be made out of some sort of stained black wood, but as I was making this project, I wanted to take it to the next level. I was appreciating the Burr oak so much, so I decided to buy some ebony and make all the inlay out of ebony. I thought it'd really elevate this piece and make this table a lot nicer for my client. cutting the ebony banding, I only needed to plane 2 sides. Those 2 planed faces would be the glue surfaces, and the rough bandsaw faces will be sanded flush later anyway. Even on the corners of the table, I decided to mitre the banding. Ebony is so black, when you flush everything off and sand it and add the finish, you're probably not even going to see this mitred joint. But I know it's there, and I think it's really nice doing those extra details. Again, I clamped all this banding on with masking tape. I had to use a lot to really squeeze it into that rebate. Flush off the banding, I used a selection of hand planes and my orbital sander. Then after that, I used a round over bit in my router to add a slight radius on all the edges. To get the smoothest tabletop possible, I water pop the surface in between each grit. All this entails is spraying the surface with a mist of water, which raises the grain and opens up the fibres, which you'll then sand off with the next grit. Doing this will prevent the grain from raising when you eventually put the finish on. So the base of the table is made out of thick solid wood ash, around 40mm. This had to be quite chunky to support the top. Ash is a really good choice for this base, because later I'm adding a hand carved textured surface, so it's soft enough to do that easily. It also has an open and striking grain, so it looks really good when you ebonize it. I had to joint a couple of boards together to get the right width I needed. The height of this coffee table is 30cm. To join these 2 boards together, I didn't add any dominoes or any other fixings because side grain to side grain glue ups are incredibly strong in itself, and the glue is actually stronger than the wood itself, so it really doesn't need it. Normally with panel glue ups like these, if people were to add dominoes, that's more for alignment than adding strength. And to help me align the 2 boards parallel to each other, I added a clamp on either end, which kept the boards in the right position for when I clamped them together. I cut the boards to rough size with a track saw, and then I took them over to my sliding table to cut the mitres. Now when you're cutting mitres, it is often very difficult to get the mitre cut exactly on 45 degrees. So the best thing to do is tilt the blade ever so slightly more to 45.5, and this will ensure a perfectly tight gap on the outside of the joint and ever so slight hairline gap on the inside. For example, with this base, it's very important for the outside to be perfectly tight with no gaps, because that's the area of the table you're going to see, and if there's an ever so slight gap on the inside of the table, you'll never see it. I used the domino to join the base together. I cut 2 rows of mortises, and this will ensure with seasonal movement the joint won't open up on the ends. Before I glued the base together, I sanded the inside. It's a lot easier to sand those internal corners when the base is flat before it's all glued together. There's a few different ways of clamping up mitred boxes. You can use strap clamps which wrap around the whole box. However, I think the best method of getting maximum clamping pressure is gluing on sacrificial clamping blocks. These are also cut with a 45-degree angle, which helps the clamp apply pressure in the right place and evenly throughout the joint. And because these blocks are glued on, you can really squeeze the clamps and close up those mitres. Later on, these blocks can be removed with a saw. Now for making the base, if you don't have a domino machine, there are different joints you can use, like a dowel joint or even a box joint. For my glue ups, I have this large brown recycled paper roll. I think I got it off Amazon. It's very inexpensive and you can get large lengths of it. I think my roll is 100 meters. And I basically roll some of that out onto my worktop, and it'll prevent any squeeze out glue from getting onto my workbench and ruining it. So I highly recommend getting one of these recycled paper rolls. It makes glue ups a lot cleaner and it's much quicker to clean your work surface after. Now this was one of the most time-consuming processes of the whole build. It might not look it on camera, but this actually took hours, actually weeks I should say, and it was very tiring work. I could only do 15 minutes at a time before my arm got dead. So what I did over a 2-week period is attack this in stints. I did about 15 minutes, and as I got tired, I worked on another area of the project, and then I went back to it until the whole base was done. So after many hours of chiseling, ash is very hard to chisel. It is easier, however, than maple, which I had considered for this base as well. After the whole base was chiseled, I had to go back over the whole thing and hand sand each divot. This gave me a really smooth surface for finishing. Half of the workshop that I extended this year, I added plywood around all the walls. This allows me to hang things up much quicker because I won't need to drill into the brickwork, I can just screw right into the plywood. And very soon, excitingly, I will be adding a big clamp rack onto the wall. Because at the moment I'm just clamping my clamps to the rafters in the roof or leaning them up against the wall. So it'd be nice to get them down from the roof and off the floor, and I also think it's going to look really nice on the wall. I'm joining the base onto the tabletop with threaded inserts. This makes it easier to transport this table and also makes it lighter by carrying it in 2 components. So I had to make these brackets which are mortise in place. Even though these brackets will never be seen, I like making everything look pretty, so I added a round over to it and even chamfered the edges. If you appreciate the content I make and you want to support the channel for free, whenever you use Axminster tools, I'd be really grateful if you go through my affiliate link in the description of my videos. If you like the look of any of the tools I use in my videos, all of them are available on Axminster. That link will just take you to their website and it will let them know I sent you, and they'll get a small cut of your purchase with no extra cost to you. It's a great way of supporting the channel and help me keep making these videos. For this project I tried a couple of new finishes. I first used Rubio Pre-Color Easy Intense Black, which ebonised this whole base perfectly. This is just a pre-stain and doesn't actually add any protection, so once this had dried, a couple of days later, I went over it again with Rubio Oil Plus 2C Black, and that gave the base a really nice satin look. And then I moved over to the tabletop. Now, it's always a good idea to do some test samples of finish on your project, because initially I had tried out Pure on a test sample of the oak, and that turned the oak a bit too yellow for my liking. So then I ordered some Rubio Mist 5% Oil Plus 2C, and that has sort of a creamy pigment in it, and that stopped the oak from yellowing and kept the oak its really nice beige colour. This also gave a really nice satin finish. I buffed it in with my orbital sander and a white buffing pad. This helped me apply the finish evenly and gave the tabletop a nice shine. So that is pretty much the coffee table complete. I'm absolutely thrilled with it. I love the Burr oak. Let me know in the comments down below if you're a fan of highly figured woods, or do you like more of the simple, plainer woods with straight grain. So I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope you learned something. Thank you very much for sticking to the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure you give it a like. If you're new to the channel, feel free to subscribe, and I'll see you very soon for the next video.